Hello, friends. Father Frank Pavone here, National Director of Priests for Life. Thank you for joining us for our Pro-Life Vote program. This is indeed one of the most important programs we have, talking about the need to vote pro-life, helping people understand the issues, understand the dynamics behind the elections, understand how to mobilize and educate other voters. And we're motivated in this broadcast by the need to end abortion, to end the Holocaust that we are living under, to end the killing of children. No government can permit the killing of the innocent. When it does, as John Paul II pointed out, the nature of the state itself changes. He said it becomes a tyrant state. So it's not just one issue among many. Allowing the killing of babies changes the very nature of government. It erodes the very foundations of civilization. If you erode the foundations, and both the Pope in his encyclical, The Gospel of Life, John Paul II, and the United States bishops 3 years later in their document, Living the Gospel of Life, say that this is exactly what happens. Abortion attacks the very foundations of the civilization and of the nation. Well, then nothing else can stand. If the foundation falls, so does everything else. So this is not just one issue we're talking about. It's the very purpose of government, the very nature of the state. And that's why we talk about it here as our principal mission, as our number one message, and as something that we can never tire of paying attention to. That's what I want to talk about here tonight for a little bit. The other day there was yet another debate between the Democratic presidential candidates. And it was held in Ohio. And in that debate, they indeed spent some time talking about the matter of abortion. Now, as I always say, those who support abortion, including the politicians, never describe it. In fact, they pretend to be talking about abortion, but they never really talk about abortion. And you'll see that dynamic in the clip that I'm going to play for you from that particular debate just a short number of days ago. They talk about reproductive freedom, reproductive rights, reproductive justice, controlling one's body, women's rights and women's health, but they don't talk about abortion. And this, brothers and sisters, is what we always have to keep in mind when we hear politicians pretending to talk about abortion, making us think they are talking about abortion, making us think they know what they're talking about when they pretend to talk about abortion, and really they're not even talking about abortion. Not one of those people on the stage, and we'll hear from some of them here in a moment, would dare open up a medical textbook on abortion and read a description of what it is. Not one of them would dare to take the sworn testimony that abortionists have given in courtrooms across this land and read for us what they say about what an abortion is. They wouldn't dare do that. They wouldn't dare do that because it would show how depraved you have to be in order to think that abortion is okay, that it should be legal, or that it is in any way, shape, or form justified. It would show how far off the mark a person is to think that it has anything to do with health care. And remember, all we're talking about here is describing abortion, not a description that I would write, not a description that the church would write. What I'm talking about here is reading the words of, quote, doctors, those who do abortions, those who write medical textbooks on how to do abortions, quoting them about how abortions are done. That just quoting them doesn't make an argument one way or another whether it should be legal or not, or whether it is ethical or not, or whether it is justified or not, or whether it limits women's rights or contradicts women's health or restricts their reproductive freedom, right? I mean, all we're doing is describing what it is. And what I want to point out to you right from the start, before you even watch this clip, is that what you will see is that this is what they do not do. They don't define what an abortion is. They don't describe what an abortion is. They certainly wouldn't show what an abortion is. Now, in response to one of our enlightened viewers, is the reason why you guys like little boys because they can't get pregnant. Wow, what a stupid question. There are such things as stupid questions. Would you like to take that little boy and maybe tear his legs off? Tear his head off, take the skull out piece by piece? Would you like to chop his arms off while he's still alive? Is my question for this particular questioner raising a stupid question. What do you think of dismembering the kid? You see, that is what these people that we're about to see are in favor of doing and allowing and, in fact, letting you and me pay for. The dismemberment of a living child. And there are some deluded, deceived people out there, some of them even running for public office, that are so twisted in their conscience, and this questioner might want to examine their own conscience on this very point, who go around saying that abortion is okay. And at the same time, they get on their moral high horse and say, oh, well, you can't molest children and you can't abuse children. Well, of course you can't. But to say on the one hand that you have some kind of moral high ground to stand on, listen to what I'm saying, that it's wrong to abuse a child, and then turn your back and close your eyes on the dismembering of the very same child, you have a real problem. So let's listen now to these Democrat candidates. And I bet not a single one of them would want a single child abused by a parent, a teacher, a priest, or a postman. But somehow turn back the clock to when that child is still in the womb, and their conscience, in reference to an action that would tear that living child apart limb from limb, is suddenly dead. Oh, the conscience is very much alive when it comes to any kind of, well, what they call child abuse, except they define it more narrowly than we do. Abuse the child in the womb? Tear that child apart? Oh, they seem to have no problem with that at all. Brothers and sisters, this is a sign of the deadening of the human conscience. You cannot have people in public office that do not see that it's wrong to kill a baby. You can't have a person like that in public office. Because as I always say, if a politician can't respect the life of a little baby, how's he supposed to respect yours? So what I'm going to do is this, show you this clip from the Democrat debate. I want you to listen to it carefully, and then we'll talk about some of the ins and outs of what they're saying, some of the deceptions of what they're saying. Oh, and let me answer this question because I'm proud to answer it. Father, are you endorsing Trump? Absolutely. Surely not, Jackie says. I support pro-life from conception till death. You have made me very sad. Well, listen, I'll gladly call a counselor for you because you're going to be even more sad if you keep listening to me. We have to re-elect President Trump, my friends, because he is committed to what government is supposed to be committed to, keeping us safe, and keeping us safe beginning with respecting our right to life when our life begins, not at some point later and pretending that beforehand, it doesn't really matter if our life is protected, but actually leading our country out of this Holocaust. Now, the people you're about to see on this stage, not a single one of them is willing to protect the right to life. Not a single one of them. The party is, in fact, in favor of you and me paying for the killing of children. Paying for the killing of children. It just, it is so bizarre that we even have to say these things. As I always point out to people, my job is really very easy. I go around every day of the week, every day of the year, trying to convince people that a living baby is good and a dead baby is bad. Trying to convince people from the highest levels of society to the most humble, private, ordinary citizen, that killing babies is wrong. Can you imagine having to, but your job is to try to convince people that killing babies is wrong? That brings us to a pretty bad place in our moral culture. So let's look at this, and then we'll analyze it a little bit. I'll comment on some of the things that were said and not said, and on some of the errors that were made in the responses of these particular presidential candidates. So just from the other night, the Ohio debate on the presidential candidates on the topic of abortion. Let's watch.
Bigger issue here.
Turning to women's reproductive rights. Ohio is now one of several states that has banned abortions after as early as 6 weeks of pregnancy. Many women don't even know they are pregnant at that time. The Ohio law, like many others, is being challenged in the courts and has not yet taken effect. Senator Harris, if states prevail on restricting abortion, what's your plan to stop them?
My plan is as follows. For any state that passes a law that violates the Constitution, and in particular Roe v. Wade, our Department of Justice will review that law to determine if it is compliant with Roe v. Wade and the Constitution, and if it is not, that law will not go into effect. That's called preclearance. Because the reality is that while we still have, as I said earlier, these state legislators who are outdated and out of touch, mostly men who are telling women what to do with their bodies, then there needs to be accountability and consequence. But, I'll go further. You may have seen it. I questioned Brett Kavanaugh when I was a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee and asked him as a nominee to serve on the United States Supreme Court, could he think of any law that tells a man what to do with his body? And the answer was no. The reality of it is, this is still a fundamental issue of justice for women in America. Women have been given the responsibility to perpetuate the human species. Our bodies were created to do that. And it does not give any other person the right to tell a woman what to do with that body. It is her body, it is her right, it is her decision.
Senator Harris, thank you. Senator Klobuchar, what would you do to stop states from prevailing? Your response.
I would codify Roe v. Wade and make it the law of the land. But what I want to do right now is just say, what if Donald Trump was standing up here on the debate stage with me? You know what I would say to him? I said, you said you wanted to do this in your race for president. You actually said that you wanted to put women in jail. Then you tried to dial it back, and you said you wanted to put doctors in jail. That is exactly what the Alabama law is. It put doctors in jail for 99 years. You, Donald Trump, are not on the side of women. You are not on the side of people of this country when over 75% of people want to keep Roe v. Wade on the book, when over 90% of people want to make sure we have available contraception. You defunded Planned Parenthood. I would fund it again.
Senator, thank you. Senator Booker, if states prevail on restricting abortion, How would you stop them? Please respond.
Well, first of all, let's be clear about these laws we see from Alabama to Ohio. They're not just attacks on one of the most sacrosanct ideals in our country, liberty, the ability to control your own body. But they're particularly another example of people trying to punish, trying to penalize, trying to criminalize poverty. Because this is disproportionately affecting low-income women in this country, people in rural areas in this country. It is an assault on the most fundamental ideal that human beings should control their own body. And so the way, as President of the United States, I'm going to deal with this is, first of all, elevating it like we have with other national crises to a White House level position. And I will create the Office of Reproductive Freedom and Reproductive Rights in the White House and make sure that we begin to fight back on a systematic attempt that's gone on for decades to undermine Roe v. Wade. I will fight to codify it, and I will also make sure that we fight as this country to repeal the Hyde Amendment so that we are leading the planet Earth in defending the global assault we see on women right now.
Congresswoman Gabbard, your response.
This is often one of the most difficult decisions that a woman will ever have to make, and it's unfortunate to see how in this country it has for so long been used as a divisive political weapon. I agree with Hillary Clinton on one thing, disagree with her on many others, but when she said abortion should be safe, legal, and rare, I think she's correct. We see how the consequences of laws that you're referring to can often lead to a dangerous place, as we've seen them as they're passed in other countries, where a woman who has a miscarriage past that 6 weeks could be imprisoned because abortion would be illegal at that point. I do, however, think that there should be some restrictions in place. I support codifying Roe v. Wade while making sure that during the third trimester, abortion is not an option unless the life or severe health consequences of a woman are at risk.
Thank you very much. The Supreme Court is currently made up of 5 Republican-appointed justices and 4 appointed by Democrats. The court just announced it will hear arguments in a case challenging some abortion rights. Vice President Biden, the Constitution does not specify the number of justices that serve on the Supreme Court. If Roe v. Wade is overturned on your watch and you can't pass legislation in Congress, would you seek to add justices to the Supreme Court to protect women's reproductive rights?
I would not get into court packing. We had 3 justices. Next time around, we lose control. They had 3 justices. We began to lose any credibility for the court has at all. I want to point out that the justices I've supported, when I defeated Robert Bork, and I say when I defeated Robert Bork, I made sure we guaranteed a woman's right to choose for a better part of a generation. I would make sure that we move and insist that we codify Roe v. Wade. The public is already there. Things have changed. And I would go out and I would campaign against those people in the state of Ohio, Alabama, et cetera, who in fact are throwing up this barrier. Reproductive rights are a constitutional right. And in fact, every woman should have that right. And so I would not pack the court. What I would do is make sure that the people that I recommended for the court, from Ruth Bader Ginsburg to Elena Kagan, who used to work for me, to others, that they in fact support the right of privacy, on which the entire notion of a woman's right to choose is based. And that's what I would do. No one would get on the court. And by the way, if in fact at the end of this, beginning next year, if in fact one of the justices steps down, God forbid, in fact, I would make sure that we would do exactly what McConnell did last time out. We would not allow any hearing to be held
Thank you, Mr.
for
Vice
a new
President.
justice.
Mayor Buttigieg, you have discussed expanding the court from 9 to 15 justices. What's your response to the Vice President?
That's right. When I proposed reforming the Supreme Court, some folks said that was too bold to even contemplate. Now, I'm not talking about packing the court just with people who agree with me, although I certainly will appoint people who share my values. For example, the idea that women's reproductive freedom is an American right. What I'm talking about is reforms that will depoliticize the court. We can't go on like this, where every single time there is a vacancy, we have this apocalyptic ideological firefight over what to do next. Now, one way to fix this would be to have a 15-member court where 5 of the members can only be appointed by unanimous agreement of the other 10. Smarter legal minds than mine are discussing this in the Yale Law Journal and how this could be done without a constitutional amendment. But the point is that not everybody arrives on a partisan basis. There are other reforms that we could consider. from term limits, don't forget justices used to just retire like everybody else, to a rotation off the appellate bench.
Thank you.
I'm not wedded to a particular solution, but I am committed to establishing a commission on day one that will propose reforms to depoliticize the Supreme Court, because we can't go
Thank
on
you very
like this.
much, Mayor Buttigieg. Secretary Castro, he's talking about making the court bigger. Your response, is it a good idea?
I don't think it is. I wouldn't pack the court. I think the plan that Mayor Pete mentioned is an interesting one, but I actually believe if we were selecting from one of those things, that the smarter move might be to look at term limits or having people cycle off from the appellate courts so that you would have a replenishment of perspective. I would also make sure that I appoint as president people who respect the precedent of Roe versus Wade, that we codify Roe versus Wade, and that we do away with things like the Hyde Amendment, because you shouldn't only be able to have reproductive freedom if you have money. We have to think about people who do not, people who are poor. And we have to concern ourselves not only with reproductive freedom, but also reproductive justice, and invest in the ability of every woman to be able to make a choice and to be able to have her health care needs met.
Senator Warren, would you consider adding more justices to the Supreme Court to protect Roe v. Wade? Your response?
I think there are a number of options. I think, as Mayor Buttigieg said, there are many different ways. People are talking about different options, and I think we may have to talk about them. But on Roe versus Wade, can we just pause for a minute here? I lived in an America where abortion was illegal, and rich women still got abortions because they could travel, they could go to places where it was legal. What we're talking about now is that the people who are denied access to abortion are the poor, are the young, are 14-year-olds who are molested by a family member. And we now have support across this country. 3 out of 4 Americans believe in the rule of Roe versus Wade. When you've got 3 out of 4 Americans supporting it, we should be able to get that passed through Congress. We should not leave this to the Supreme Court. We should do it through democracy, because we can.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Wow, these people do not know what they're talking about. Let's analyze a few of the things that were said there, brothers and sisters, and reveal how absolutely hollow their positions are. And I thank so many of you that have been Phyllis and Chirping Cardinal and others, George, who have been making comments as we listened to that idiocy just now. First of all, did you hear them define or describe an abortion? Of course not. They talk about reproductive freedom, reproductive rights, reproductive justice, women's health, the Constitution, but not about abortion. Not one of them was talking about abortion, which when you read the medical textbooks describing what it is, you will see the word dismemberment. You will read the word decapitation. You will read the words arms and legs. Did you hear the words arms and legs in any of their comments? Well, in an abortion, a baby's arms and legs are crushed and ripped off, and depending on the stage of pregnancy and the method of abortion, one way or another, the body of that child is destroyed. Various abortionists talk about how the head is taken out in pieces, the skull is taken out in fragments. Did you hear any of them use the word bones? You know, taking the bones out through the birth canal is one of the many hazards of the abortion procedure, because they can cut and rip the body of that woman. But no, you didn't hear them use the word bones. You didn't hear them use the word forceps, the grasping instrument that pulls the arms and legs off the baby. Did you hear them use the word heart, or refer to the fact that abortionists have testified that in the first trimester of pregnancy, a baby's heart can still be beating when the baby is suctioned down the plastic tube? Did you hear them use the word suction? Did you hear them use the word tube? Did you hear them use the word plastic? Notice, their words were nothing physical and concrete, but rather all ideal and abstract. Virtue signaling. Oh, we're on the side of women. We're on the side of the poor. We're on the side of the Constitution. They try to make themselves sound so good. Bones, arms, legs, skulls. Did you hear the word blood? Did you hear the word organs, heart, liver, brains? Did you hear them talk about how the brain matter will flow out of the woman's body during the abortion procedure? The white matter of the brain gushing out. Did you hear them say that? You see, these people are in denial. They can talk all they want about freedom and the Constitution. Did you hear them use the word kill? Did you hear them use the word infant life to describe the unborn? Did you even hear them use the word unborn? Did you hear them use the word baby? Blind spot. Can anyone say blind spot? There's another being in the equation here. We're not even debating abortion. There's another being in the equation which makes the whole discussion necessary. You can't just stand there and talk about the rights of women and pretend that there's not another human being there. Brothers and sisters, even the abortionists admit this is ending the life of a human being. Even the court, the Supreme Court, has acknowledged that abortion ends the life of a human being. And do these people have the honesty to even say it? I mean, if they're really going to be honest, they would say it and then say that they support it. Yes, I know that abortion is dismemberment, or they could even quote the Supreme Court in multiple cases. Roe v. Wade is not the only abortion case that the Supreme Court has decided. There have been multiple cases since then. And in those cases, so, for example, the 2007 Supreme Court case, Gonzalez v. Carhart, in which the Supreme Court describes how the baby bleeds to death. I wonder how come that phrase, bleeds to death, wasn't quoted by these Democrat candidates who love the Constitution so much, except on the days that they're shredding it to pieces, which happens to be, I don't know, every day that ends in a Y. Bleeds to death. Like Mary is saying, they don't care. They really don't care. And that's the fundamental problem. I'm going to answer some of the other silly things they said. But the fundamental issue here is they don't care about human life. And the protection of human life, my brothers and sisters, is the first duty of government, not the second or the third after you've established, like Senator Booker wants to do, the Office of Reproductive Freedom and Rights. Give me a break. We're going to establish the Office of Reproductive Freedom in the White House. Is that the first purpose of government? Is that why the White House is there? Well, let's go through some of what we just heard. Right away, you heard right at the beginning of that clip, the CNN debate moderator, right away, right from out of the gate, putting only one perspective on the very question of abortion, and that is referring to it as reproductive rights. Well, right away, that takes one side over the other, and even in asking the question. And speaks about laws like Ohio passed to protect the children in the womb as laws banning abortion, restricting reproductive rights. Well, you can look at these laws as restrictive, or you can look at them as protective. Depends who you're talking about, doesn't it? And again, that goes back to the blind spot, which eliminates conveniently an entire person from the equation of the conversation. Are you just restricting the so-called rights of the woman, or are you protecting the baby? Defend the Constitution. Now, Harris started off with this, and so many of the others jumped on it too. She said, oh, I would defend the Constitution and Roe versus Wade, as if they were the same thing. My friends, get a copy of the Constitution. I carry one around in my suit jacket pocket all the time. Have a pocket Constitution with you. It's a great sign of our patriotism. And read it every once in a while. It's not a long document. And find for me in the Constitution the word abortion. Find for me in the Constitution the term reproductive rights. It's not there. The Constitution is silent on abortion. To say that somehow upholding Roe versus Wade is the same as upholding the Constitution is just plain ridiculous. There is no such thing in the Constitution as a right to abortion. And then Harris goes so far as to say that the states can no longer pass their own laws. Did you hear carefully what she said? That if a state passed a law protecting babies in the womb, in her vision of what her presidency would be like, the federal government would stop the states from even enacting a law. Like Janet is saying now, the left is sick. They have no regard not only for the babies and their moms, but for the way our government in this country is set up. Now, then she goes into the assertion that, oh, by the way, it's mostly men in these legislatures that support these laws that they detest because these laws restrict abortion. Mostly men. Well, it was completely men who passed Roe versus Wade. It was all men. So to say that because it's men making the decision about abortion that somehow that deserves less attention or less respect or has less validity is a self-contradictory position for people who claim to be supporting Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade was voted on and passed by men. First of all, it doesn't make any difference what gender you are. What makes a difference is the truth of what we're saying. In fact, there was even, I told you, the Supreme Court has ruled multiple times on abortion. Do you know that one of those rulings, Bray versus Alexandria, actually dealt with the question of whether or not there are rational reasons, rational positions for opposing abortion other than gender, other than the fact that you're a man, other than the fact that people are trying to say you're against women? There's actually a Supreme Court case dealing with that question, and guess what the court said? The court said what any of us who have common sense would say. Of course there are good reasons for opposing abortion. And it does not in any way imply that you are against women when you are trying to protect children. And by the way, when you're trying to protect women themselves from the devastating effects of abortion. We know what those devastating effects are because we work every day with people who have had abortions, as we oversee the Rachel's Vineyard retreat program around the world, dealing with and helping those going through the pain of an abortion, as we work every day with the women and men of Silent No More who talk about the devastation abortion has brought to their lives, the devastation of abortion physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, relationally, the way it tears apart the family, destroys one's self-esteem, affects one's ability to make decisions or to continue with education and career, the very things that some of them thought they were preserving by killing their child, not realizing that maybe killing their child would so devastate them that they wouldn't be able to continue with those things anyway. But do these people care about that? Do they even want to mention that? If you think, as so many of them said in that little clip, that you are on the side of women and you're advancing women's health, don't you think maybe you should stop and ask the question, what does abortion do to women's health? And look at study after study after study that shows the devastating impact of abortion on women's health? But no, not one mention of that. The entire proceedings that you just heard were wrapped up in this envelope of presumption that, oh, this is a good for women, and we can't possibly take it away from them. And God forbid that we would let men in the states take it away from them, or people on the court take it away from them, and God forbid that this prized treasure, this wonderful good of abortion, should only be available to the rich and not to the poor. Well, Democrat candidates, good for you. We got to make sure the poor can kill their children, right? You wouldn't want the rich killing their children only. We got to make sure that the poor can kill their children and those poor women can suffer the lifelong devastating effects of an abortion. Oh, you don't want to deprive them of that. You don't want to deprive them of that. My goodness. And then, notice how they all bought into the idea right away that this is about women controlling their bodies. Let me ask you right now, how many of you think that there are laws in effect right now that legitimately restrict your ability to control your body? They even went so far as to say Kamala Harris thought that she was saying something smart. She was so proud of herself that she questioned Brett Kavanaugh as to whether there are any laws that prohibit men from doing what they want with their body. Have you ever heard about drug abuse? Have you ever heard about illegal drug use? Oh no, there's no laws that tell men what they can do with their bodies. You ever heard about illegal drug usage? How about lying down in the middle of the street? How about standing up in an airplane while the airplane is taxiing down the taxiway? Or taking off on the runway. You ever try to stand up in an airplane and get told by the airline staff that you are breaking federal law? Oh yeah, we can control our own bodies. Oh, of course we can. If somebody gets in my way while I'm walking down the aisle in the supermarket, I can push them out of my way, right? I mean, just shove them out of my way. I can lie down in somebody's driveway and prevent them from driving their car into their own driveway. I can do that, right? I can control my own body. I can go outside and, hang from the nearest overpass just for the fun of it. I don't go there and see how long I can hang there. I'll have my friend standing up there ready to pull me up in case my arms get tired. Well, yeah, I can control my own body. No law is going to tell me. Actually, there is no law that tells men what they can do with their bodies, right? I mean, we go out and lie down on the highway every night. How on earth do we allow people, like we just heard, to say nonsense like that? How do we allow this? How do we allow people we consider to be educated people to speak utter nonsense like this? How do we allow people that some people think are worthy of the highest office in the land? How is it, my friends, that we let them get away with speaking this nonsense? It really is hard to fathom. Now, Harris made an interesting assertion there. She said, and it's so self-contradictory like all the pro-abortion positions are, that women are entrusted with the perpetuation of the species, and then she goes on to say, in other words, that, well, therefore, they should be allowed to kill their babies. Do you realize how silly this is? If you're entrusted with the responsibility of perpetuating the species, which, of course, by the way, women can't do by themselves, but putting that aside for a moment, yes, they do have an inherent responsibility for the perpetuation of the species. It's called motherhood. How on earth does then that lead to the right to not perpetuate the species and kill your offspring? They say these things pretending that because they're saying one set of words right after another set of words, they're pretending that there's some kind of logical connection between the two sets of words, when there actually isn't. Amy Klobuchar. Oh, isn't this terrible? They're going to throw doctors in jail. You don't think medicine is supposed to adhere to any legal standards? What do you mean? Well, what's so bad about throwing doctors in jail? When they kill people, they're not supposed to be subject to a jail sentence? And then, of course, the assertion that a number of them made that 75% of the American people support Roe versus Wade is a completely deceptive statement. First of all, there have been analyses done of the polls that have been taken on abortion since the time of Roe versus Wade, and the analysis of those polls, based on the way the questions are asked, have made it crystal clear that, for the most part, the surveys asking people about Roe v. Wade do not accurately reflect in the question what Roe v. Wade actually said. See, if you're going to ask people, or you're going to try to say what most Americans think about Roe v. Wade, you have to make sure that what they're thinking about is Roe v. Wade, right? Roe v. Wade said something very specific. It said abortion can be done throughout all 9 months of pregnancy, but that the states could prohibit it in the 7th, 8th, and 9th month and could regulate it in the earlier months under certain conditions. That's what Roe versus Wade said. Now, actually, and this is once again a display of how little these people actually know about abortion and the court's jurisprudence on this topic, the court has severely weakened, modified, and reversed various aspects and abandoned other aspects of Roe versus Wade. Again, it's not like they handed down Roe versus Wade and it was some kind of dogma coming down the mountain on the tablets and it's been sacrosanct ever since. Nonsense. You read what the court has done, and it has practically all but eroded Roe versus Wade entirely, and there's good reason for that, which I'll get back to in a moment. But the point here is that the position that Roe v. Wade set forth, that abortion could be permitted throughout pregnancy, and that the states, if they want, but they don't have to, can prohibit it in the 7th, 8th, and 9th month of pregnancy, the American people do not and never have supported that position by any kind of majority. They never have. Now, I have some recent polling here, for example, because then, as you noticed in that debate clip, the way that the conversation went on towards the end was, well, what should we do about the Supreme Court? And the only way, the reason that they would be talking about that is that they correctly see, thanks to President Trump, that the courts are slipping out of the hands of the left. The courts are no longer a reliable tool for the left to impose their agenda on the rest of America, which is what they've relied on the courts to do for decades. But President Trump, having placed now some 180 federal judges on the federal courts, including 2 Supreme Court justices for lifetime appointments, he's making them very, very scared. And so they have to think about, somehow we have to change the way that the Supreme Court is put together, because, what they're not saying, but what is motivating them to say all this, is that they're losing control of the courts. Well, yeah, elections have consequences. But then they try to say, erroneously, that the public is with them on Roe versus Wade. The public is not with them on Roe versus Wade. Now, if a person doesn't understand what Roe versus Wade says, you could get them to answer in a survey that, I support Roe v. Wade, I don't want to see it overturned. But then when you actually ask them what their positions are on abortion, well, let's look at a few recent polls. Gallup poll back in May of this year asked, with respect to the abortion issue, would you consider yourself to be pro-choice or pro-life? Pro-life respondents 49%, pro-choice 46%. A CNN poll, same people who moderated that debate, back in May, asked this question: do you think abortion should be illegal in all circumstances or in only a few circumstances, as opposed to legal under most circumstances or all circumstances? Where do you think the majority fell in those, if you split it out as 2 different positions? Either I want it always illegal or legal only in a few cases, versus I want it always legal or at least under most circumstances. 54% of the respondents to a CNN poll, 54% of the American people said they either wanted illegal always or most of the time. The majority of people reject the vast majority of the reasons abortions are done. Another way to say that, the majority of the people reject the position of Roe versus Wade. That's very different from what these Democrat candidates just said about 75% of the people supporting Roe versus Wade. Going even further, back in January, Marist poll did a survey and asked this question: what do you think about banning abortions after 20 weeks, except to save the life of the mother? Now, Roe versus Wade permits abortion after 20 weeks. In fact, the U.S. is only one of 7 nations that do that. Banning abortions after 20 weeks, 59% said they strongly support doing that. And in those who oppose, whether strongly or not, 32%. That certainly doesn't sound like the American people are with Roe versus Wade. More detailed question here in a June poll that came out in June of this year, a Marist NPR PBS NewsHour poll, talked about this because there are various states talking about these laws prohibiting abortion after 20 weeks. Which statement most closely describes your own position on abortion? And then they list 6 different positions. Never permitted in any circumstance, permitted only to save the life of the mother, permitted only in cases of rape, incest, or to save the life of the mother, or permitted only during the first 3 months. 70% of the people had one of those positions. Only 29% said it should be only during the first 6 months or available anytime during pregnancy. So again, most of the people do not support the position contained in Roe versus Wade. So you can't stand there honestly and say that most Americans support Roe. Most Americans oppose the positions contained in Roe versus Wade, even though they may not know what position is contained in Roe v. Wade because nobody told them, including the person asking the question on the poll. Furthermore, looking a little bit more at what some of these folks said. See, so what they all tried to say, or just about all of them, I think they all said it. They want to codify Roe v. Wade. What they're trying to say is, let's take this from the realm of the court and actually put it in the realm of the legislatures. You know what I say to the abortion supporters? If you're so interested in codifying Roe versus Wade, what have you been waiting for? And of course, the reason they haven't done this decades ago is what I just said, and is reflected in these polls. The American people have never bought into the position of Roe versus Wade. So why do they want to codify it now after 46 years? Now you're going to get around to codifying Roe versus Wade? To putting what the court said, you're putting what the 7 men on the court said back in 1973 into laws that you want to pass today? Oh, by the way, you want men to pass those laws too? Or the votes of men on abortion don't matter? Oh, I would codify Roe versus Wade. How? We just have women vote on it and, exclude the pro-life women? This is such garbage. They don't know what they're talking about when they say codify Roe versus Wade. Because as I already mentioned, Roe versus Wade permits not only regulations and restrictions on abortion, but in the 3rd trimester permits the states to prohibit it. These people on that stage, with the exception of Tulsi Gabbard, who said, contrary to all the rest of them, that abortion should not be permitted in the 3rd trimester, all believe that it should be permitted at any time for any reason. So how do you codify a decision that permits abortion to be banned in the 3rd trimester and claim that women should be able to control their own bodies and we should have no restrictions on it? The way that you do that is by speaking when you don't know what you're talking about. Biden, not knowing what he's talking about, said that the whole so-called right, a woman's right to choose, is based on privacy. Oh, really? He's stuck in the past, my friends. The Supreme Court has actually shifted the basis on which it tries to justify Roe v. Wade, when in fact it has tried to justify it in subsequent decisions. Constitutional experts, even who agree with legal abortion, and I'm talking even about people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg sitting on the Supreme Court, have pointed out that Roe versus Wade lacks any constitutional basis. Listen carefully to what I'm saying. The decision that these Democrat candidates practically identify with the Constitution, Roe versus Wade and the Constitution, oh, well, you know, it's all the same thing. Roe versus Wade doesn't have any constitutional basis. Not only because the Constitution is silent on abortion, and nothing that is said anywhere about people's rights or privacy or anything else shows any connection with the killing of a child. But the very basis that the court uses to justify Roe v. Wade is on shifting sand. The court has moved from a consideration of, quote, privacy to a consideration of liberty, particularly the court's decision in 1992 in Planned Parenthood versus Casey shifted the constitutional basis, the attempt to find a constitutional justification for a so-called right to abortion. Roe v. Wade himself, in fact, had said in the decision that the right is not absolute. They didn't say in the decision, a woman has a right to control her own body and therefore there can be no restrictions on abortion. Do you think that that's what Roe versus Wade said? Go back and read it. In fact, how many of you have read the Roe versus Wade decision? I'd like to ask those candidates how many of them have read the Roe versus Wade decision. The Roe versus Wade decision actually says that the states have legitimate rights that they can pursue in order to regulate abortion, interests including the health of the woman. And they didn't base it on her right to control her own body. Roe versus Wade actually says it's a medical decision over which the physician has decision-making authority. So they've got to get their story straight. It's not the woman's right to control her own body. Roe versus Wade says it's inherently a medical decision. And if the physician's judgment is that this is not medically helpful, he can say no to someone getting an abortion. And the state can also advance its interests in the potential life. It's actually an actual life, but the court uses the term potential life, growing inside the womb. But of course, these people aren't going to tell you that. And then, of course, doing away with the Hyde Amendment. Biden says, you know what the Hyde Amendment does? It protects your tax dollars and mine from paying for somebody else's abortion. Most people, even who consider themselves pro-choice, don't want to be forced to pay for someone else's abortion. But Joe Biden, as well as all the other people on that stage, want to force you and me, the Democrat Party, because it says it explicitly in its platform, I'm not making this up, says that you and I should be forced to pay for somebody else's abortion. Because you saw how they were talking there. Oh, God forbid that we should, keep the poor from having abortions. They want you and me to pay for it. So those are just some reflections. We could go into much more depth, but I think the point is clear. These people don't know what they're talking about. They don't want you to know what they're talking about. They have no conscience. They have no respect for the fundamental purpose of government, which is the protection of life. And yes, we strongly support President Trump in order for us to restore the protection to the unborn, the protection of the right to life. We have to get around this president, the Republican Party, the platform that they have clearly talks about the rights of the unborn as rights that cannot be infringed. And in fact, that's sort of reminiscent of our Declaration of Independence that says the right to life was bestowed on us by the Creator, and that governments exist to secure these rights. Go back and read the Declaration of Independence, my friends. Government exists to secure these rights, starting with life. Final poll here, I referred to it earlier, came out in June. Marist NPR PBS NewsHour poll asked this question: which one of the following issues will be the most important factor in deciding your vote for president in 2020? 12% identified abortion as the most important factor in deciding their vote. Now, a lot of others consider abortion as an important factor, but these are just the ones who say it's the most important factor. And within those, among those people, the number who are pro-life is twice, more than twice, the number who are pro-choice. There is more than a 2-to-1 margin among those who vote on the abortion issue as the most important issue in their vote for president in this upcoming election, more than a 2-to-1 margin voting pro-life. That can sway the whole election right there. So never think that this is an issue that's being ignored. It's not. Never think that this is an issue which cannot swing the election. It can. Never think that your position or your vote on this is unimportant. It's monumentally important. And never think that you can't influence other voters just based on this issue. Because you can. And in fact, we must. Let me conclude here with, again, thanking you for your prayers and your comments. Let me go to the prayer here we have in our booklet for the elections. As we prepare to elect our leaders, in my booklet, in the palm of his hand, we have an election prayer. You can find this at electionprayer.com, by the way, the prayer I'm about to say. I ask you to say this each day for the coming year as we prepare for a very, very big and meaningful election. Of course, we have elections coming up in a matter of days, November 5th, the 2019 elections. And one of you was saying you're from Virginia, and Virginia has very important elections for their legislature coming up on November 5th, important elections in Kentucky and Mississippi and Louisiana and New Jersey and so forth. So prayer is called for. It's urgent. And I ask you to say this prayer with me. Again, electionprayer.com is where you will find it. Let's pray together. Oh God, we acknowledge you today as Lord not only of individuals, but of nations and governments. We thank you for the privilege of being able to organize ourselves politically, and of knowing that political loyalty does not have to mean disloyalty to you. We thank you for your law, which our founding fathers acknowledged and recognized as higher than any human law. We thank you for the opportunity that this election year puts before us to exercise our solemn duty not only to vote, but to influence countless others to vote and to vote correctly. Lord, we pray that your people may be awakened. Let them realize that while politics is not their salvation, their response to you requires that they be politically active. Awaken your people to know that they are not called to be a sect fleeing the world, but rather a community of faith renewing the world. Awaken them that the same hands lifted up to you in prayer are the hands that pull the lever in the voting booth, that the same eyes that read your word are the eyes that read the names on the ballot, and that they do not cease to be Christians when they enter the voting booth. Awaken your people to a commitment to justice, to the sanctity of marriage and the family, to the dignity of each individual human life, and to the truth that human rights begin when human lives begin, and not one moment later. Lord, we rejoice today that we are citizens of your kingdom. May that make us all the more committed to being faithful citizens on earth. We ask this through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. electionprayer.com. Thanks for listening tonight, and now may the Lord bless you and protect you, answer all your prayers, and make you effective witnesses for the lives of the children in the womb. And may he bless you, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Father Frank Pavone here of Priests for Life. Talk to you again tomorrow. Have a good night.
He is the National Director of Priests for Life. Please go to priestsforlife.org